Hello, today we are going to move on in our factoring unit and learn how to factor trinomials using our factor by grouping method that we learned last time. So last time we learned how to do the grouping method when there were 4 terms, but remember trinomials, they only have 3 terms. So with our grouping last time, it was really easy when we had 4 terms because, I don't know why I put 3 there. When we have 4 terms, it's really easy to group into 2 groups of 2. So that makes it easy. But what do you do if you only have 3 terms? If I group them, one of my guys is left out. So what we end up doing is instead of trying to figure out what to do with 3 terms, we go ahead and we make 4 terms. And so what we're going to do to get 4 terms from 3 is we're going to take this middle term, bx, and we're going to split it into 2 new pieces so that I have my ax squared plus some new thing here plus some new thing here plus c. And that way I have my 2 groups of 2. So the trick is figuring out what pieces we should put in those 2 placeholders. So here are kind of the general steps for when you factor trinomials. They're going to be in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are going to be numbers, and c is just going to be a constant, so it won't have a variable on it. Before you do anything, always check for a greatest common factor. If there is something in common between all 3 numbers, it will make it easier for you to solve if you take that greatest common factor out first. Leaving it in will actually make it harder for you in the long run. So we always want to check and see, is there something in common between all 3 things before we start doing the factor by grouping. Once we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to find 2 numbers that multiply to be the last number but add to be that middle number. So that's kind of the tricky part, is we're going to have to think of our factors of numbers. That's why knowing your times tables comes in handy. So that way we can know what 2 numbers multiply to be c but add to be b. And then once we know what those 2 numbers are, those are going to be the 2 numbers that we use to split up here and here. So say that we figured that m times n equals c, and m plus n equals b. So remember, what we're trying to do is find 2 numbers that multiply to be c, but when you add them, equal b. So once we find those 2 numbers, you're going to split them up and do mx and nx. So that's kind of the idea there, is figuring out what the m and the n are. And I know when you're just looking at all the variables, you're like, what in the world is she talking about? When we get to some examples of numbers, it'll be easier. But once you have those 2 numbers, m and n, you can go ahead and do your factor by grouping with those 4 terms. So let's look at some numbers so that it actually makes sense. So on this first one, we have 2b squared minus 11b plus 5. So again, first you always want to see, is there something in common between all 3 numbers? Well, 2, 11, and 5 are all prime, so there's nothing in common, and we can't take a b out of all 3. So there's no greatest common factor. So we're just going to skip that step, and we're going to go straight into figuring out our numbers here. So how this works is you are going to take the first number and the last number, and you're going to times them together. So you're going to do 2 times 5, which equals 10. And then from there, you're going to think what multiplies to be 10, but adds to be negative 11. And I'm a really visual person, so I like to do this little X chart. So I take the number that you multiplied and put it in the top, and the number you're trying to add to and put that on the bottom. And we're trying to think of factors of 10 that will make 11. So our factors of 10 are 2 and 5 and 1 times 10. So we want to pick the pair that will give us 11, which is going to be 1 times 10. We do have different signs here though. So we want them to add up to be a negative 11. So I want to change it to a negative 1 and a negative 10. So that way -1 subtract 10 is that -11 that I need. But when you times them, -1 times -10, those two negatives make that +10. So these are going to be the two numbers that you're going to pick that we're going to use to split up this middle term so that we can have 4 numbers instead of 3. It doesn't matter what order you put them in. I could put the -1 here and the -10 here, or flip it. I could do 10 and 1. It's going to work out either way. So I'm going to have a -1b and then a -10b. And don't forget to put the b's on it, because remember we're breaking up 11 b's into 1 and 10 b's. We keep the first term, the 2b squared, and we keep the +5 at the end. And that way now we have 4 terms instead of 3 terms by just breaking up that 11b into 1b and 10b. So now we can go ahead and do our 2 groups of 2. Remember, whenever there's a negative, we need to make sure to bring that inside with that 10b. And then if you remember from last time, once you have your 2 groups, you're going to look at each group individually and find the common factor. So for 2b squared and 1b, 2 and 1 aren't going to have anything in common, so all we can do is take some b's out. So there's 1b we can take out from this guy. So we're going to take 1b away. 2b squared, if I take 1b away, leaves me with 2b. And 1b, if I take a b away, leaves me with 1. So don't forget that when you take the variable away, there's still technically a 1 there. A lot of students forget this piece and they just leave it blank, but we need that placeholder of that 1. Okay, looking at this group, we have a -10b plus 5. Last time we also talked about how we don't like this first term to be negative. So whenever it's negative, we're going to take a negative out so that it flips all my signs. And then if we look at our numbers, 10 and 5, we can take a 5 away from 10 and 5. So our greatest common factor is going to be -5. -10b divided by -5b will turn to a +2b. And 5 divided by -5 is -1. So again, don't forget the 1 there. And remember, our checkpoint is to make sure those 2 middle groups match, which they do. We have 2b minus 1 and 2b minus 1. So that means we did it right, and we're ready to write our answer. So to write your answer, you're going to take one of the matching groups, 2b minus 1. And then on the inside of the second group, you're going to put the 2 greatest common factors from out front. So we have a b minus 5. And that's your answer. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I know the first time you see it, it's always kind of confusing, but don't worry, we've got several more to do. So let's look at number 2 here. We have 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. So again, the first thing you're going to do is times those 2 front numbers. So 2 times 3 is 6. That 6 is going to go in the top of the little x table. And then the middle number 7 is going to go in the bottom. And you're going to think, what multiplies to be 6 and adds to be 7? Well, our factors of 6 are 2 times 3 or 1 times 6. 2 and 3 is 5, but 1 and 6 is 7. So we're going to take that one. So 1 and 6, when I times them, make 6, but 1 plus 6 equals 7. So those are the 2 answers that we want. So we're going to use that to split the 7x up into a 1x and a 6x, keep the 2x squared, keep the plus 3, and then group them into your 2 groups of 2. And then once you do that, we're going to look at each group and find the common factor. So for 2x squared and 1x, what we have in common is an x in both. 2x squared divided by x is 2x, and 1x divided by x is 1. Again, don't forget that 1 there. For the next group, 6x plus 3, 3 is going to go into 6 and 3, and we can't take a letter out because the 3 doesn't have an x on it. So all we can do is take the 3 out. 6x divided by 3 is 2x, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. Again, we need that 1 there. And then we see our 2 groups are matching, 2x plus 1, 2x plus 1. So we did it right. So our answer, we're going to keep one of the 2x plus 1s out front, and then the 2 greatest common factors are going to go inside, x plus 3. And you're done. Okay, we're going to do a couple more. Down at number 3, this time we have 3x squared plus 8x plus 5 Again, we're going to times that first and last number. So 3 times 5 is 15, and that's going to go in the top of the x, and then what you add is going to be that middle number down on the bottom. So we're thinking of two numbers that multiply to be 15 but add to be 8. So our factors of 15 are 1 and 15, but that won't give us 8, or 3 and 5. Well, lucky for us, 3 plus 5 is 8. So 3 and 5 are going to go here. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 plus 5 is 8. So we're good. I always kind of like to do that check to make sure I have the right numbers. So then we split up the 8x to be 3x and 5x. Keep the 3x squared and keep the plus 5. And then group them into the two groups of 2. Once you have your two groups, we're going to go ahead and find the greatest common factor in each group. So for 3x squared and 3x, we can take a 3 out of both and also 1x away. So 3x is the GCF. 3x squared divided by 3x is 1x, and 3x divided by 3x is 1. So again, we need that 1 here. Don't just leave it blank. 5x plus 5. Can't take an x out of this one, but we can take a 5 away from both. So 5 is the common factor. 5x divided by 5 is x. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So again, we get that 1 there. We see we're matching. We have x plus 1 in each group. So we did it right. So our answer will be x plus 1. And then inside the second group, we'll have a 3x and a 5. So 3x plus 5. And you're done. So really everything from here on down is the same as what we did last time. The only new part is finding those two numbers. But once you have those two numbers, it's just your factor by grouping steps that we did last time. Okay, let's do number 4. So notice that on these two, they don't have numbers in front. Whenever there's not a number in, it's just a 1. So we're just going to treat them as 1s. So we're going to do 1 times negative 6. Which is negative 6. That's going to go in the top of the little x table. And then 1 is our middle number, so that's going to go in the bottom. So now we're trying to figure out what two numbers multiply to be negative 6, but add to be 1. So remember, your factors of 6 are 2 and 3, and 1 and 6. So if I want to get two numbers that make 1, 2 and 3 is going to work, but one of them needs to be negative. So right now I have 2 and 3 as positive, but I need 1 to be negative so that when I times them I get a negative 6. But I need it to be so that when I add them I get a positive 1 back. So we're going to do the 2 negative. That way negative 2 plus 3 equals 1. If I did the 3 negative, I would have had negative 3 plus 2, which is negative 1, which would not work. So we want the 2 to be negative. So careful with your signs there. And put a little note. So careful with signs when you get those negatives. So negative 2 and 3, that's how we're going to split the a up. So I'm going to have a negative 2a and a 3a. We're going to keep the 1a squared. You can just write a squared if you want. And negative 6 in the back. And then we're ready to do our two groups of 2. So finding the greatest common factor for this group, a squared minus 2a. We can take an a out of each. A squared divided by a is 1a, and negative 2a divided by a is negative 2. For the second group, 3a minus 6. For 3a and 6, we can't take an a out, but 3 does go into both. So we're going to take a 3 out. 3a divided by 3 is a. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. And so here's your checkpoint. We did it right because we have that matching a minus 2. So our answer will be one of those. So we have one a minus 2 in the front, and then the a and the 3 go in the second group. So a plus 3. And you're done. Okay, and then let's look at this one. Again, we see this one doesn't have a coefficient, so it's just going to be a 1 whenever it's not written. So start by taking that first number and timesing it by the last. 1 times 4 equals 4. So that's going to go on the top of your table. And then that middle number 5 goes in the bottom. We're trying to think of two numbers that multiply to be 4 but add to be 5. Well, we could do 2 times 2, but that doesn't add to be 5. So the only other option is 1 times 4. 1 times 4 is 4, but 1 plus 4 is 5. So that one works. All of our signs are good because everything's positive, so we don't need to worry about any negatives on this one. So we're going to split that 5b to be a 1b and a 4b. Keep the b squared and keep the plus 4. And then now we have our 4 terms, so we can do our 2 groups of 2. And then inside those 2 groups of 2, you're going to find your greatest common factor. So for b squared plus 1b, all we can do is take a b out of each. B squared divided by b is b, and 1b divided by b is 1. Again, don't forget the 1 there. 4b plus 4, we can take a 4 out. So 4b divided by 4 is b, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. Again, a common mistake is when students are like, oh, I'm taking the 4 out, so nothing's there. But remember, it's like you're dividing. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So careful with that easy mistake to make. But we did it right. We have a b plus 1 in each group. So our answer is going to be one of the matching groups, b plus 1. And then the 2 greatest common factors go inside their own group. So b plus 4. Okay. And then let's look at the next one. This will be our last one. We have 8x squared plus 26x plus 20. Notice that these numbers are all pretty big. If we did 8 times 20, we'd get 160, which might be kind of a pain to try and use since those numbers are getting pretty big. This is kind of a good hint that there might be a greatest common factor in all 3 terms that you can take out at the beginning. So remember, I told you to always look for a greatest common factor as your first step before you do any of this stuff. So when I look at these 3 terms, 8, 26, and 20, is there something that I can take out of all 3 of them? And there is. We can take a 2 out. So if I take a 2 out, that leaves me with 4x squared plus 13x plus 10. And now my numbers have become smaller. So making those numbers smaller is going to make my work easier when I'm doing these steps up here. So always take out that greatest common factor if you can. So let's take out that greatest common factor first. And then once we do that, now we're going to use this new trinomial to factor. So I'm going to do 4 times 10, which is 40. And that is going to go in the top of the x table. And then the middle number is now 13. That's going to go in the bottom. But I would much rather use 40 and 13 than doing 160 and 26. Those numbers are really big. So taking that common factor out front makes these numbers smaller, which is a lot easier to do in your head when it comes to doing factors. So thinking of your factors of 40, we could do 1 and 40, we could do 2 and 20. There's 5 and 8. So out of those, the ones that add up to be 13 is 5 and 8. So 5 plus 8 is 13. So 5 times 8 is 40, but 5 plus 8 is 13. So we're going to take those 2 numbers. And then we're going to split the 13x to be a 5x and an 8x. And keep your 4x squared in the front and the plus 10 in the back. And then we have our 2 groups of 2. But also, don't forget we have this 2 up here. I'm going to ignore it for now, but we're going to need it when we write our final answer. So looking at this first group, 4x squared plus 5x, we want to take out the greatest common factor. So we can't take a number from 4 and 5, but from our x's, we can take at least one x from each term. So 4x squared divided by x is 4x, 5x divided by x is 5. Then we repeat. For 8x and 10, we can take a 2 out of each. So 8x divided by 2 is 4x, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. We see we get those matching 4x plus 5, so that means we did our answer right. So we'll keep 1 4x plus 5, and then the x plus 2. And it's really easy to just say, oh, I'm done, and box your answer, because we've done all this work. That a lot of people forget this 2 that we took out at the very beginning. We need to bring this 2 back down. So that's a really common mistake, is if you take out that greatest common factor, you go and do all this work and you totally forget about that too. So make sure to bring it back down because it needs to stay a part of our problem. And that would be your final answer. So just be careful with that. Also, I just want to point out, on ones that have just a 1 in the front, 1a squared and 1b squared, these two problems, notice how when we did these little tables right here, we said, well, 1 times 6 is 6, and we wanted to add to be 1, right? So we got -2 and 3. Look at our answer, -2 and 3. Let's look at this one. We did 1 times 4 is 4, and we wanted to add to be 5. So we did 1 times 4 is 4, 1 plus 4 is 5. Look at your answer again. 1, 1, 4, 4. There is a shortcut on those. So your shortcut is only for when your leading coefficient is a 1. So like this example here, when it was a 1b squared. So let's say if I just did this problem with the shortcut way, b squared plus 5b plus 4, because this number is a 1, I do 1 times 4, but that's just 4. So it kind of really doesn't do anything. That's why this one's so nice. And then we add to be that middle number still. So we get 1 times 4 is 4, 1 plus 4 is 5. Instead of going through and doing all of this work, the shortcut is that you can just take those two numbers and go straight into your answer. You're going to have b plus 1 and b plus 4, and you're done. So that's the shortcut, which is really convenient. Once you get those two numbers, they're just going to plug into your parentheses with your variable in the front. So if it's a b, it'll be a b. If it's an x, this will be an x. So that's a really convenient one to do. We'll run into more of those shortcuts later, but I did just want to point out, but it only works when that leading coefficient is a 1. So if there is a different number, like an 8, or how this one had a 3 or a 2 or a 2, it doesn't work on those. It only works when it's a 1 in the front. But when you do run into those, it's definitely worth doing the shortcut because it saves you from having to do all of this extra work. You can just skip from straight here to here. Okay. So that is your factor by grouping when it comes to 3 terms. Again, most of the process is going to be the same. The only new part is just this kind of little table where you have to get those two numbers so that you can split that middle term into 2 terms. So that way you have 2 groups of 2. And once you have those 2 groups of 2, it's going to be the same as what we did last time. So, but like I mentioned at the beginning of the unit, factoring does not go away. We use factoring all of this year, all of next year in math. So I want to make sure you guys feel good and confident with it. If you are having any questions about any of this material, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Send me an email and we can go over some questions and I can help you get to where you need to be. I want you to have a good, strong foundation now rather than trying to struggle and keep up for the rest of the year. So please reach out to me if you have any questions. Hope you guys are doing good and you're healthy. I will talk to you later. See ya.